3:41 a.m. The radar return held steady for one final sweep, then vanished. One moment, a U.S. Air Force fighter jet was a bright, disciplined signature slicing across the darkness over Philippine waters. The next moment, it blinked out of existence. No explosion on screen, no frantic distress call. Just empty ocean where a $90 million aircraft and a highly trained American pilot had been seconds before. Controllers called his call sign 3 times. Silence. In military aviation, silence is never just silence. It's a warning. And within minutes, 2 nations were about to move.
The aircraft had been flying routine night maneuvers over the western Philippine Sea, part of a joint training rotation designed to sharpen interoperability between Allied air forces. Weather conditions were deteriorating. Low cloud ceilings, unstable crosswinds, isolated rain cells rolling across black water. Still within limits. The pilot was experienced, decorated, calm under pressure. He had logged combat hours in hostile airspace and trained in complex Pacific scenarios. Losing him without warning didn't fit the profile. But the ocean doesn't respect resumes, and that night, it swallowed a fighter whole.
Inside the operations center, American officers replayed the radar sweep frame by frame. They searched for clues in milliseconds of data. A sudden descent, a micro-deviation in heading, a signature spike, anything. There was nothing definitive, just a vanishing point 120 nautical miles west of Luzon. Protocol shifted instantly from training to emergency response. The phrase possible ejection changed the air in the room, because if he had punched out in time, he was now alone in open sea, injured, disoriented, racing against currents and darkness.
Surface water temperature hovered near 27 degrees Celsius, technically survivable. But survival at sea is more than numbers on a chart. It's dehydration creeping in under tropical humidity. It's fatigue from fighting swells. It's currents dragging you miles from projected grids. The Philippine archipelago stretches across vast maritime corridors, shaped by monsoon winds and shifting tides. At night, under thick cloud cover, visibility collapses. A life raft becomes a speck. A human head between waves, almost invisible.
At 3:53 a.m., a secure communication line connected U.S. Pacific Air Command with Philippine Air Force Headquarters. Coordinates were transmitted. No hesitation, no procedural drag. Search grids were drafted in real time. Philippine aviators were awakened, briefed, and ordered to scramble. Within minutes, aircraft crews were moving across dimly lit hangars with focused urgency. What followed would later be described by American officials as one of the fastest joint search and rescue responses in the region, because in those waters, proximity means responsibility.
At Basa Air Base, rotors were uncovered and fuel lines checked under floodlights reflecting off wet tarmac. Pilots climbed into cockpits still warm from standby readiness. A Philippine rescue helicopter lifted into the humid darkness less than 30 minutes after the alert. Its engines thundered across the sleeping coastline. Inside, the crew understood the stakes. They weren't searching for debris. They were searching for a man, possibly clinging to life in an endless stretch of ocean. Simultaneously, maritime patrol aircraft launched with surface search radar and infrared systems optimized for open water detection. Unlike combat sorties, this mission required disciplined patience. Grid after grid swept methodically. The sea below absorbed light, reflecting only broken shadows of cloud and rain. American command fed drift models based on wind vectors and surface currents. Philippine crews adjusted without hesitation. This was no exercise now. It was a race against exhaustion and exposure. Back in the American command center, survival probabilities were calculated in silence. An ejection at speed can fracture bone, dislocate joints, cause internal trauma. Even with flotation gear, injury can sap strength quickly. If his locator beacon malfunctioned, visual identification would become the only path. Every minute expanded the search radius. The ocean was moving him relentlessly. But Philippine search planners had studied those waters their entire careers. They knew where currents bent around unseen underwater terrain.
At 4:36 a.m., the first infrared sweep detected a faint anomaly, brief, inconsistent, almost dismissed as wave interference. The helicopter banked back sharply. Nothing. Then something again. The crew chief leaned out the open door, scanning with night optics, while wind-driven spray whipped against his visor. The pilot lowered altitude despite worsening weather. Fuel margins tightened. They would push within safe limits, because hesitation at sea can be fatal.
A Philippine Navy patrol vessel operating within range received the alert and altered course immediately. Engines surged, floodlights were tested, medical teams assembled below deck, rescue swimmers secured harnesses. Coordination between air and sea assets tightened into layered patterns across the projected drift zone. This wasn't a staged drill. It was instinct shaped by years of responding to typhoons, ferry accidents, and fishermen lost beyond radio range.
Meanwhile, American officials began the most difficult part of any aviation emergency, preparing to notify command and family liaison officers. "We've lost contact" is a sentence heavy with uncertainty. Hope and dread exist in the same breath. Above the dark sea, Philippine aviators continued sweeping relentlessly. Fatigue did not enter the equation. Somewhere below, an Allied pilot might be staring upward, listening for engines that meant survival.
At 5:27 a.m., monitoring equipment picked up a weak emergency beacon, intermittent, flickering, barely above interference thresholds. The helicopter shifted heading instantly. This time, the crew chief saw it, a small shape rising and dipping between swells, orange against black water. The aircraft hovered carefully as rain intensified and rotor wash churned the surface. They still couldn't confirm movement. Then the raft tilted. A hand lifted slowly above the rim.
The crew chief's voice cut sharply through the intercom. The helicopter stabilized. A rescue swimmer clipped into the hoist and descended into rolling waves. Water slammed against him as he reached the raft. The American pilot was conscious, disoriented. A deep cut marked his forehead. He had ejected seconds before impact, watching his aircraft disappear in flame and spray. He had drifted nearly 9 nautical miles from the last radar point.
The extraction unfolded with disciplined precision. Harness secured, controlled hoist, stabilization inside the cabin. The Philippine flight medic moved immediately, checking vitals, controlling bleeding, administering oxygen. Over encrypted radio, a single word was transmitted to both command centers: recovered. In the American operations room, tension that had stretched for hours released in a quiet exhale. In the helicopter, there was no celebration, only focus. The mission wasn't over until wheels touched land. Dawn broke over the coastline as the helicopter approached base. First light revealed exhaustion etched across determined faces. The pilot, now stabilized, managed to grip the medic's arm. Through pain and fatigue, he whispered, "Thank you." Those 2 words carried more weight than any formal commendation, because survival at sea is never guaranteed. It is earned through speed, discipline, and refusal to surrender to darkness. On landing, ambulances were already positioned along the runway. Philippine ground crews transferred the American pilot with seamless coordination. U.S. liaison officers met them beside the aircraft. Firm handshakes, brief nods, no spectacle. Professional respect speaks quietly. Public commendations would come later. In that moment, the only priority was recovery and stabilization. Joint investigators began reconstructing the sequence of events. Preliminary data pointed toward mechanical malfunction compounded by weather disruption. The descent had been rapid and unrecoverable. The pilot's decision to eject had been immediate and correct. Survival hinged on seconds, but survival afterward depended entirely on response, and that response had been swift. Within military aviation circles, footage of the rescue spread quickly. American pilots studied how efficiently the Philippine crews launched and executed their search grids. There was no rivalry in the analysis, only admiration. Because every pilot understands a single truth. One day, it could be you below.
What impressed American commanders most was not just speed, but environmental mastery.
Philippine crews adjusted search lanes based on subtle current shifts near underwater ridges and pre-dawn monsoon patterns. That awareness narrowed the drift window. Minutes were shaved from uncertainty, minutes that may have preserved consciousness.
The rescued pilot later described the silence after ejection, the vast emptiness, the uncertainty of whether anyone had seen him punch out. His beacon flickered unpredictably. He remembered calculating how long he could remain alert before dehydration set in. Then he heard rotor blades in the distance. Hope has a sound. That morning, it sounded like Philippine engines cutting through rain. Weeks later, joint exercises resumed over the same waters, but something had shifted. Coordination had deepened into trust. American pilots flew knowing that if the worst occurred, response would be immediate. Philippine aviators flew with quiet confidence, having proven capability not in words, but in action.
Military cooperation is often measured in agreements and public statements. Its true measure is different. It's who launches at 3:53 in the morning without debate, who pushes aircraft to fuel margins in worsening weather, who lowers a swimmer into black water because someone out there is counting on them.
Behind closed doors, both air forces refined procedures and strengthened communication protocols, not because something failed, but because something worked. Professional militaries analyze success as rigorously as mistakes. This rescue became a benchmark in multinational search and rescue coordination. Months later, the recovered pilot met again with members of the rescue crew. This time there were photographs, smiles, a handshake that lingered beyond formality. "That's when I knew I'd see my family again," he told them, recalling the moment the swimmer reached his raft. There are few higher compliments in uniform. For Philippine aviators, the mission joined a long history of maritime rescues: typhoon evacuations, capsized vessels, fishermen retrieved from distant shoals. Yet this one resonated differently. It underscored regional capability to the world. It demonstrated that alliances are more than strategic alignments. They are lifelines. American officials later emphasized how critical regional proximity is in a theater defined by ocean. Aircraft can deploy from continents away. Ships can traverse thousands of miles, but local knowledge cannot be flown in at the last minute. That night, geography favored preparedness. Not all military stories are battles. Some are quiet races against time. This one carried tension without spectacle. Professionals moving with disciplined urgency. No grandstanding, only execution. That authenticity forged lasting respect. Today, when American pilots brief before flying over Philippine waters, the incident is referenced not as caution, but reassurance. If the worst happens, you will not be alone. Confidence built on proven response is different from confidence built on equipment alone. The ocean remains vast and unpredictable. Aircraft remain complex machines vulnerable to failure. Those realities persist. What stands between accident and tragedy is response, training, coordination, and people willing to launch into darkness without hesitation. At 3:41 a.m., a radar return disappeared over Philippine waters. For hours, uncertainty ruled. But when rotor blades pierced rain and a swimmer descended into black waves, uncertainty gave way to action. A U.S. pilot came home because Philippine aviators moved immediately. Not for headlines, not for praise, but because in that part of the Pacific, when one falls, the other answers.